What happens when a judge says unseal everything and suddenly private messages are no longer private? Hollywood freezes, friendships change, and silence becomes louder than any headline. Because right as third-party communications are ordered public, one of the most famous friendships in Hollywood appears to crack unanswered calls, canceled plans, and a quiet distance that no one is explaining. Is this coincidence, or is pressure finally doing what jokes and red carpets never could stay with me? Because what comes out next may change how this story is understood forever. The moment the judge finally said unseal everything, the atmosphere around this entire case shifted in a way that could not be undone, because this was never just about legal paperwork or procedural filings. This was about private conversations, text messages, emails, and third-party communications that powerful people believed would remain hidden forever. And when that illusion collapsed, it sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom, because suddenly this was not just about Blake Lively or Ryan Reynolds. It was about everyone connected to them, everyone who texted, called, advised, joked, vented, strategized, or reassured behind the scenes. And that is why the timing of what happened next matters so much, because almost immediately reports began surfacing that something was off between Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, a friendship that Hollywood treated like a brand in itself, a bromance built on years of public affection, shared interviews, viral jokes, and blockbuster chemistry. And yet now insiders are saying there are cracks, not loud dramatic blow-ups, not public unfollows, but something quieter and far more telling: missed calls, unanswered texts, canceled plans, and a noticeable distance that did not exist before. And people close to the situation say Hugh has gone unusually silent, while Ryan appears to be doing all the reaching. And that silence is where the story really begins, because silence in Hollywood is rarely accidental, and it almost never happens without a reason, especially when legal pressure is mounting and a judge has just made it clear that celebrity status does not come with special treatment, and that the public has a right to see unredacted filings and third-party communications. And once that door is opened, it cannot be closed again, and everyone knows it, because once names appear, once associations are documented, once conversations are contextualized, the fallout is no longer hypothetical, it becomes personal. And this is why insiders say Hugh Jackman may be quietly stepping back, not out of betrayal, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation, because loyalty has limits, and even the most supportive friend eventually reaches a point where they realize they are being pulled into a situation they never agreed to be part of. And sources say Hugh does not want to be mentioned in filings. He does not want his name trending alongside legal drama. He does not want to be asked questions he cannot answer. And he certainly does not want to be dragged into a battle that shows no signs of slowing down. And when the judge ruled that third-party privacy interests were not enough to justify sealing the materials, that changed everything, because it meant communications involving agencies, studios, executives, and friends would no longer be shielded. And that includes people who were never intended to be part of the narrative but now find themselves adjacent to it. And adjacency in a legal case can be just as dangerous as involvement, because perception shapes headlines and headlines shape careers. And insiders say Hugh Jackman is extremely calculated about where his name appears and why. And while he values loyalty, he also values peace and reputation. And that is why the reports feel believable, because they align perfectly with the moment pressure increased and the safety net disappeared. And it is not just about Hugh either, because this ruling set off a chain reaction across Hollywood, where people are quietly reassessing their proximity to this case and asking themselves whether being supportive privately is worth the potential cost publicly. And that is the uncomfortable truth about situations like this, because when a judge says unseal everything, it is not just a legal command, it is a signal that the story is about to expand. And once it expands, it does not care who gets caught in the blast radius. And sources say Ryan Reynolds has been visibly frustrated behind the scenes, trying to maintain normalcy, trying to keep friendships intact while also fighting a legal battle that has grown increasingly complex and public. And when one person is in crisis mode and the other is trying to maintain distance, that imbalance creates tension, whether either of them acknowledges it or not. And this is where the story stops being about gossip and starts being about human behavior under pressure, because we have all seen it before. Friendships change when stress becomes constant, when problems do not resolve, when the same crisis loops over and over. And at some point, even the most patient friend has to choose between being supportive and being consumed. And insiders say Hugh Jackman may have quietly made that choice, not by announcing it, not by confronting it publicly, but by stepping back slowly, intentionally, and without drama. And that quiet distance speaks louder than any headline, because it suggests awareness, not ignorance, calculation, not chaos. And when you pair that with the fact that unredacted materials are scheduled to be released imminently, and oral arguments are set with public attendance guaranteed, it becomes impossible to ignore the pattern because timing tells stories, and this timing tells one of anticipation, caution, and retreat, and the question is no longer whether cracks exist, but how many people are already repositioning themselves before the full scope of these documents becomes public. And that is what makes this moment feel different. Because it is not speculation, it is momentum, and momentum changes everything. As the countdown toward the release of the unredacted materials continues, the pressure inside Hollywood is no longer theoretical, it is palpable. Because everyone understands what unsealing actually means in practice. It means context, it means timelines, it means receipts, and it means that private reassurance given in text messages can suddenly look very different when read aloud in a legal filing. And this is where anxiety begins to spread quietly, because once documents are public, they are no longer controlled by press teams or spin, they are interpreted by audiences who draw their own conclusions, and insiders say this is exactly why some relationships are cooling. Not out of malice, but out of caution, because being supportive in private is one thing, being attached publicly is another, and the judge made it clear that third-party communications will not be protected simply because they are uncomfortable or inconvenient, which sends a very strong signal that this court is not interested in celebrity sensitivities, and that alone is enough to make people reassess their exposure. And this is where the Reynolds Hugh Jackman dynamic becomes impossible to ignore. Because while Ryan is still publicly joking and maintaining the familiar persona, those close to him say the stress is showing in quieter moments, in conversations where frustration slips through and the weight of the situation becomes clear. And when one person is living inside that pressure every day and the other is trying to avoid being pulled into it, the gap naturally widens, and sources say Hugh has become increasingly selective about where he shows up, who he is seen with, and what narratives he allows himself to be connected to, and that selectivity is not accidental, it is strategic, because once your name appears in a filing, it does not matter whether you did anything wrong. Perception fills the gaps, and perception can be relentless. And this is why the ruling matters so much, because it removes the buffer zone that fame usually provides and replaces it with a legal process that treats everyone the same. And insiders say that realization has caused quiet recalculations across agencies, studios, and friend circles, where people are asking themselves not whether they trust Ryan or Blake, but whether they trust the process to be kind once everything is exposed. And for many, the answer is no, and when that answer lands, distance becomes the safest option. And this does not happen overnight. It happens gradually: missed plans, polite excuses, delayed responses, until eventually the silence becomes noticeable, and that silence tells a story all its own. Because in Hollywood, nothing disappears without explanation, it just fades until someone notices and asks why. And when sources say Hugh skipped events he was expected to attend with Ryan and chose to go solo instead, it reinforced the sense that something had shifted. And not because of one argument or betrayal, but because the environment changed. And when environments change, relationships adapt or fracture, and insiders emphasize that Hugh is not choosing sides, he is choosing stability. Because being associated with a high-profile legal battle comes with unpredictability, and unpredictability is the enemy of carefully built careers and reputations. And that is something Hugh has protected meticulously over decades. And this brings us back to the court itself. Because the judge did more than unseal documents, the judge reaffirmed the public's right to observe, to attend, to read, and to understand what is happening. And that transparency changes behavior, because it removes the illusion that things can stay contained. And once that illusion is gone, people behave differently, they speak differently, they pull back, and they protect themselves. And sources say Ryan is feeling that shift acutely, because the circle is shrinking, and when the circle shrinks, the pressure intensifies. Because there are fewer places to decompress, fewer people to lean on, and fewer distractions from the reality of what is coming. And that reality is that once the documents are released, narratives will be tested, statements will be compared, and timelines will be scrutinized, and anyone who appears even peripherally connected will be discussed, analyzed, and judged whether they want to be or not. And this is why some insiders believe Hugh Jackman's distance is not temporary, but intentional, at least until the dust settles, because stepping back now allows him to avoid being pulled into conversations he cannot control and questions he should never have to answer. And that is a rational decision in an irrational environment. And as the days tick closer to release, the tension continues to build, not with explosive confrontations, but with quiet avoidance, unanswered messages, and polite distance. And that quiet is often more revealing than any public feud, because it suggests awareness, foresight, and a desire to remain unentangled. And when you combine that with the fact that more legal maneuvers are underway. New representation is being brought in specifically to manage communication and narrative. It becomes clear that even those at the center of this understand how fragile perception has become. And when perception is fragile, every association matters, every photo matters, every appearance matters, and every friendship becomes a potential headline. And this is the environment in which these cracks are forming, not because loyalty disappeared, but because survival instincts activated. And once that happens, relationships are no longer just emotional, they are strategic, and that is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of this story, because it is not about villains or heroes, it is about people responding to escalating pressure in the ways they know how. And sometimes that response looks like silence, distance, and stepping out of the frame before the spotlight burns too bright. As the legal calendar advances and deadlines tighten, the emotional temperature surrounding this situation continues to rise, because anticipation is often more destabilizing than revelation itself. And those closest to the center of this storm understand that once the unredacted materials are released, there will be no slow rollout, no careful framing, no gentle introduction to context. It will arrive all at once, dense, detailed, and open to interpretation. And insiders say that knowledge alone has altered behavior across the board, because people are not waiting to see what happens. They are preparing for what could happen, and preparation often looks like distancing, repositioning, and reducing exposure. And this is where the story of friendship intersects with the mechanics of reputation management. Because in moments like this, personal relationships become professional considerations, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. And sources close to multiple parties describe an atmosphere where everyone is watching everyone else, waiting to see who appears, where who speaks when, and who remains conspicuously absent. And absence becomes its own statement, because when someone who used to be present suddenly is not, it invites questions, and questions invite speculation, and speculation feeds narratives that no amount of public humor can fully deflect. And this is why the quiet around Hugh Jackman feels intentional, because it coincides too perfectly with the escalation of legal scrutiny to be coincidence. And insiders emphasize that Hugh is not known for impulsive decisions, he is known for restraint, foresight, and long-term thinking. And those traits matter when navigating a situation where documents rather than statements will shape public understanding. And when those documents include third-party communications, the calculus changes dramatically, because even benign exchanges can be reframed once removed from their original context and read through the lens of conflict. And this is why so many people are bracing themselves, not for what they said, but for how it might be read. And once that fear takes hold, relationships naturally tighten or loosen accordingly. And in this case, they appear to be loosening quietly, deliberately, and without public explanation. And while Ryan Reynolds continues to project confidence publicly, insiders suggest the strain is increasingly difficult to mask, because maintaining a lighthearted persona while navigating escalating legal exposure requires constant effort. And when that effort is not mirrored by those around you, it can feel isolating. And that isolation compounds stress, because there are fewer outlets, fewer distractions, and fewer reminders of normalcy. And sources say that is part of what makes this moment so challenging, because the familiar support systems are no longer functioning the way they once did. And that shift forces a reckoning, because it highlights how conditional proximity can be when circumstances change. And this is not unique to this situation, it is a pattern seen whenever high-profile disputes move from private negotiation into public adjudication. Because the moment transparency becomes mandatory, risk tolerance drops, and those who have little to gain from association step away first. And that does not require confrontation, it only requires time, silence, and strategic absence. And this brings us back to the court, because the judge has consistently reinforced the principle that transparency outweighs discomfort. And that principle is now guiding the next phase of this case, which includes public arguments, unredacted filings, and a level of scrutiny that few involved have experienced before. And that scrutiny extends beyond the parties themselves to anyone whose name appears in the margins, footnotes, or communications. And insiders say this is why agencies and studios are quietly reviewing their own exposure, assessing what might surface, and preparing responses in advance. And when institutions behave this way, individuals often follow suit, because no one wants to be caught unprepared when narratives shift overnight. And that anticipation creates a ripple effect where people begin to separate themselves emotionally and physically from the epicenter of controversy. And this is how circles shrink, not through conflict but through caution. And as the release date approaches, the silence grows heavier, because everyone understands that once the documents are public, there will be no going back to before. And relationships that feel strained now may feel irrevocably altered afterward. And that awareness shapes decisions in the present because people are not just reacting to what has happened, they are anticipating what will happen and adjusting accordingly. And that adjustment often looks like distance because distance provides plausible deniability and emotional insulation, and while none of this confirms intent, it paints a consistent picture of behavior under pressure where loyalty is weighed against longevity and support is balanced against self-preservation. And this is why the story resonates, because it reflects a reality many recognize even outside Hollywood, that when crises become prolonged and public, even the strongest bonds are tested, not by one dramatic moment but by sustained uncertainty and the inability to see an end point. And as the clock continues to tick toward disclosure, the question is no longer who is right or wrong, but who will still be standing close when the full picture finally comes into focus, and who will have already stepped away, quietly hoping to avoid being part of the aftermath.